Welcome to a special and unique part of our weekly discussions because this week we have an added, it's not even just the Torah Parsha, but this is Purim. Today, when this is online, it's Erev Purim, where we will be reading Megillat Esther, the story of Esther and Purim. And I can't think of a better person to accompany so many of the heroine aspects of Esther, of Queen Esther, than my dear, dear friend, founder of Zioness, a legal expert among many other accolades, Amanda Berman. So, Amanda, thank you for being the special edition for Purim.
What an honor, seriously. An honor to be your friend and to get to have this conversation with you.
So this week we are diving into a story that many people know. They know quite well, actually. The story of Purim, when an evil man named Haman, tries to convince a seemingly easily influenceable king, Ahasuerus, to kill all of the Jews in the land of Shushan. And it is only because of Mordecai and his niece Esther who go to the king and to convince them not to kill the Jews, and in fact to twist it and to turn it on Haman, and that it is Haman who is the one who ends up being destroyed in the end. This is a story of redemption. This is a story of perseverance, of the importance of political activism. I mean, there are many, many themes in the Purim story. But Amanda, this is what's on your mind? What comes up for you in the Purim story?
Well, I love the Purim story like so many Jews do. It's fun. The way we celebrate it is fun. Obviously, there's some darkness. There's really always the reminder that the Jewish community has always had threats, that there have always been people that want to commit a genocide, that want to exterminate us, that even as we sit here today, Hamas continues to rule Gaza, committing over and over again to a genocide. Iran, continues to threaten Israel and the Jewish people everywhere. So, even thousands of years later, the same ideas continue to circulate, and there continue to be people all over the world who subscribe to those ideas that the Jewish people shouldn't exist on the planet. It's also obviously an incredibly feminist Jewish story in so many ways, and so meaningful to me as a woman, a Jewish woman, a person who thinks a lot about what it means to be a Jewish woman in the world, to hold those identities. As a feminist who has felt pushed out of various feminist spaces, as a Jew, as a Zionist, as a committed member of my community who refuses to abandon it, as Queen Esther also was. Not that I in any way want to compare myself to Queen Esther, but strong Jewish women in the past have, of course, inspired the strong and confident Jewish women of the present. And so Queen Esther, in many ways, is an icon of, Jewish feminism and of feminism broadly, but also so is Queen Vashti. And, they're together, I think, tell a really important story about the different ways that you can lead, the different personalities that you can embody, the different options that you have to think about what it means to show up in yourself or your values, whether you submit in some ways, knowing that there is a longer strategy in place, whether you reject outright things that don't make sense or feel good to you. Different leaders will think about those things differently. And both of these women certainly did in the Purim story.
Oftentimes the Vashti story becomes such a sidebar in the retelling, especially in the Jewish retelling of the story. I don't know if it's because I don't know if she was technically Jewish or not, but it is. I love that you're starting with that because the Purim story, as it's written, it didn't have to be written to include the Vashti story. The way we know that history is told, it could have just said King Ahasuerus needed a new wife. He looked for a new wife, and then he got Esther. But instead, we get the whole Vashti story. So what is it? What is it about the Vashti story that particularly speaks to you?
Vashti really embodies a much more modern feminism than other sort of biblical tales. And there is feminism throughout our text historically, which I think a lot of people forget. I think, I've even heard members of our Jewish community making comments about the sort of misogyny in all religion. And I know, of course, that that's true and that there are certain Jewish communities that have practices that I would certainly not consider feminist. But broadly speaking, the Torah has lots of different feminist stories. Vashti was modern in that she was really committed to her bodily autonomy. She was really committed to protecting her image. And these are things that I don't, I obviously have no experience, living in ancient Persia, but that is such a contemporary issue in terms of the way that women are, exploited in today's society, that women have to decide how and when to use their bodies, their appearance, their sexuality, to protect themselves or to get ahead, or, what all the different ways that these issues intersect. And Vashti's total unwillingness to submit in a public way in order to prove anything to anyone, and her willingness to actually die to, given that she was refusing to dance naked for, at the king's behest. So that's a level of strength and confidence that a lot of women know. I don't know how many women today, if their husband told them to go out in the street naked, would really say that was a great idea. I don't know how many people who are the wife of a king would do that either. But the idea that someone would be willing to die in order to protect their body and their right to make their own determinations about who gets to see their body, and what to protect their own sort of sexuality, really feels very contemporary in many ways. And to your point, it's not necessary for that to be a part of the story that we've told over and over again for thousands of years. And I think it's really important, as all of our texts are. They don't have extraneous things in them. And there's so much to think about as to how and why all of these different things get included. And when we tell these stories over and over and over again, year after year after year, and we are so committed as a people to the book, to remembering all of these little specific details and how they relate to the bigger picture of what we're supposed to take with us from these different events and holidays, there's obviously a very important reason why we have both Vashti and Esther, and why we are expected, I think, to compare them to each other, to think about the different ways that they use their femininity and their identities to teach us really important lessons.
A huge part of the Purim story that also gets told a lot is the role that Mordecai plays. He is somebody who is close to the seat of power. He sort of is an advisor in many ways. Part of the midrash around Mordecai is that he's actually part of the Sanhedrin. He was part of the high court of Israel. He was actually part of the high court during the destruction of the first temple. So the exile that takes place, so Mordecai has a lived memory of a temple time. Anyway, that's a little bit of a sidebar, but Mordecai, but he's somebody who's seen as like a real power player in terms of understanding the king and the court system, and how to advocate for Jewish issues. You've built an entire company, a movement around navigating politics, policy, narrative. Um, what are some of the lessons that you've seen, or what do you take from the parallels between a Purim story, which is ancient and that we retell every year, and what we're going through in modern times right now, and how important it still is to have Jewish advocacy?
You know, in some ways it's so inspiring to look at the Purim story, and in other ways it is so depressing that we still have to do this delicate dance around power and trust, and knowing who in power has our backs, who in power is using us, exploiting us, weaponizing us for something, who we can trust, who to go to. Of course, there's, such a big part of the story of Queen Esther not knowing whether or not she is safe approaching the king and even telling him that she is Jewish. And there are so many Jews in the world today who are feeling that every single day, waking up and asking themselves, should I be openly Jewish? Should I take my mezuzot down? Should I, wear a yarmulke in certain parts, or just a baseball cap? As you can see, I am covered in Jewish jewelry, and I feel really strongly about that, about not taking it off. I know so many people, of course, went out after October 7th and bought Jewish jewelry and said, I want to be a proud Jew. I want to be an open Jew. I want to tell everyone that I'm Jewish. I want to be a confident Zionist. I am passionate about the Jewish community and the Jewish future. But it took that vulnerability for a lot of people to actually say, you know what, I want to claim that. I want to own it. And, I think Esther was in a really, obviously, I don't think, we all know Esther was in a really difficult situation. We don't know whether the king had actually killed Vashti or just disappeared her, but we know that, Vashti didn't survive in the world that she was living in the life that she was living in after refusing to do what the king wanted her to do. And so Esther had no way of knowing whether she was going to be safe approaching the king with, the threat to the Jewish community that she wanted to tell him about. So it's really heartbreaking, really incredibly heartbreaking that so many, millennia later, so much persecution later, so much trauma later, we are still having to think about where and under what circumstances we are safe to be openly Jewish, who we can trust to say, we need your support, we need you to have our backs. What world leaders have really the best interests of the Jewish community and are taking action in a way that will keep us safe rather than make us even more vulnerable? So, it's gut-wrenching in so many ways and also so inspiring because Mordechai really was a real strategic thinker. I mean, he's someone that, I would hire if I were in politics as a chief of staff, if I were in direct politics, because he's really thinking about all the different players and all the different ways that this could go south. And he's saying leadership means having the courage to stand up, even when it's scary, even when it's hard. It means, refusing to submit to your fear because the consequences of that are so much bigger. And I think a lot of times people, it's not fair that so many Jews were 0.2% of the population of the world. And we are expected to do the educating around anti-Semitism. And of course, that's just how it is in 2020. And since then, we've done so much work as a society, not nearly enough, but so much work talking about implicit bias and understanding the way that anti-Black racism is embedded in our systems and our societies and how we've internalized it in many ways. And of course, nobody does that when it comes to anti-Semitism. I think we should continue doing it when it comes to all forms of racism and bias and bigotry, including anti-Semitism. And, part of that conversation around doing that work, taking that on as individuals, as members of a collective society, and knowing that it is up to all of us to educate ourselves, to make ourselves better, more informed, more justice-oriented citizens, is not expecting members of a persecuted community to teach us about their oppression and their persecution. When it comes to the Jewish community, I always tell people it is absolutely up to us to advocate for ourselves. No one is going to advocate for us. No one is going to tell our story. And if we're not out there telling it, it's going to be told in incredibly dangerous ways. It is absolutely up to us, whether you want to be deputized with that obligation or not. It is up to you. It is up to us and no one else to tell people what anti-Semitism is, how we experience it, how our traumas have been triggered, those intergenerational traumas have been triggered over such a long period of time, why we feel vulnerable, why we lack so much trust in so many of our institutions and political leaders, and help people learn and figure out how to be allies to our community. And Mordechai really inspired Queen Esther to do that with the king. And of course, she did it very successfully at that time. And I just pray that there's someone in this administration that can do it too.
One of the things that you just touched on that I find particular resonance with is understanding and telling our own story. And so some of what also comes to Mordechai's political brilliance is understanding the story to tell and how to tell our story. And he says to Queen Esther, perhaps for a time such as this, you are in this role and you're on this earth for this exact moment. But also a lot about understanding what his story is. And so following this midrash of the way in which Mordechai actually lived in the land of Israel during the time of the first temple. And so he is a refugee, he is exiled, he is somebody who has a memory. And there's a decision of how to define himself, how to identify what that identity is and what the story to tell is. And so that was a choice. And so he chose a particular way. As a concluding thought, heading into Erev Purim here and reading the Megillah, while there is so much turmoil and it is depressing to feel like just 3,000 years later, we're still having the same fight. What's giving you hope right now? What's something that is a really is there something that you can leave us with that on a holiday Purim that tends to be such a celebratory one? What's a bright spot for you right now?
It's a hard day for that question. It's a hard week and month for that question. I am inspired by the leadership of a lot of women in our community, some whose names we know, many whose names we don't, Jewish students on college campuses, Jewish women leading in progressive organizations where they have to constantly stand up as Jews and push back. Jewish moms who are raising proud Jewish children, Jewish teachers in day schools who are helping young Jews figure out their narrative and their story and what their Jewishness and what their Zionism look like and how to express and articulate that in this really complicated and polarized world. And I think Purim, like so many, not every, but so many Jewish holidays, is an opportunity for us to smile as we reflect on the story, to celebrate the victory, Esther's victory in protecting our people, to remember what it means to actually stand up, to have the courage to stand up, and how hard it is to do that, but how much success you can achieve, even when you don't want to, even when you don't think it's fair, but that we are all on this earth for a reason. And there is a reason that the Jewish people continue to exist. There's a reason that thousands of attempted, genocides later, well, some number of attempted genocides later and thousands of years later, we continue to be here telling our story. It's the same story. We've maintained the same story over thousands of years by telling it, by owning it and claiming it and bringing it into our practices all over the world. I mean, I'm so inspired. I always think about this on Jewish holidays and on Shabbat, that Jews in every corner of the earth are practicing the exact same, practices, that rituals, that we're all telling the story of Vashti and Esther and Mordecai and King Ahasuerus and what happened in ancient Persia. So that's a beautiful thing. And that you can walk into a synagogue or a Jewish community anywhere in the world and recognize the same stories in despite what a tiny community we are. So I would encourage everyone to go out and celebrate, to take this moment to be together in community and, feel positive about the possibility to get through incredibly difficult moments together, and take those groggers and, whip them furiously, because we have a lot of Hamans out there everywhere, in leaders, in positions of power, on campuses and businesses, out on the streets, they're everywhere, and we will fight them, and hopefully we will win.
For your Torah wisdom today, but mostly for your friendship always. Thanks for your conversation today.
Love you. Thank
Love
you
you.
for
Chag Sameach.
Hag Sameach.